Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And Arif, there's a lot of interest in real estate, as we know, especially right now. Buyers, they're curious about whether or not the market's going to see prices go down. Homeowners are curious about the value of their property right now. And I think the main focus from both sides of that is, where's the market going from here? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I've got a few thoughts on that. And it's a bit of a concern, Mike, actually, because one of the things that I'm actually hearing is that people are saying there's going to be a crash. We're in a bubble. We must be in a bubble. And I can appreciate.
When did that start? I've never heard that expression before in real estate.
No, probably about, a decade ago, at least, maybe 13 years. The challenge, though, with that is under what is traditionally, the right environment or criteria to call it a bubble. One could see it happening, but with COVID and with so many variables introduced in the last couple of years, I don't see it. I really don't see it. Yeah. That doesn't mean that behaviors won't change, and it doesn't mean that there won't be some new anomalies that kick in, and so we might see some cycles, but I don't see a crash coming anytime soon.
I think the bubble thing is more of a hope and a wish from many than it is an expectation. I think what we will see, though, is a gradual cooling of the market as the looming interest rate rise, if it is to come about, and all indications are we are going to see interest rates start to go up. And I don't know that we can complain because they've been historically low for so long. But as they begin to creep up, I think it's going to start to quiet some of the activity in the market. It won't kill it. It's not going to reverse it. It's not going to take prices down. But instead of seeing 20, 30% increases every few months like we've seen in some months over the last couple of years, I think we'll probably see a gradual return, if not an immediate return, to year-over-year increases of under 5%.
So great points, Mike, and I think I'm tracking with you for most of it. I'd offer that, people are concerned, and they have every right to be concerned. Yeah. Why? Because there's no magic bullet. In order for us to see a stabilizing of those year-over-year increases, along with healthy interest rates, along with reduced household debt, increased household income, something's got to give. And we need something new to enter into that equation and to stimulate the economy that in a sustainable way. Right now, what we have is we have some unusual trends with what's been nicely referred to as the exodus out of the GTA. Yeah. That has created upward pressure on areas like our region in Barrie, also east and west of the city, and also other provinces. You're seeing an upward trend. When you see a considerable migration, that in itself, regardless of everything else going into the equation, affects the outcome of said equation, right? So that is a huge pressure. I don't see, we see people with carrying greater household debt than ever, and we're not seeing people with increased incomes.
Yes,
so, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, I just want to add to that. But those are very real facts that you add there. But I think there are other prevailing facts there that I think are influencing the market and will continue to influence the market. And when we talk about the exodus, it's not that Toronto real estate market's crashing because everybody's leaving and coming to Barrie. All markets right across the country have seen an increased activity. There's just an added increase across the board for buying homes. And there's a number of reasons for that. And low interest rates plays into that. Certainly the exodus to Barrie, and I think we should just focus on the Barrie region, so central Ontario, if you will, predominantly being fed by that exodus. But and it's because of the price differential, but it's being facilitated by the fact that there's increased worker flexibility now. And it wasn't something that just happened overnight, but when the pandemic happened overnight, suddenly we saw employers and employees coming to the realization that, hey, we can do our jobs remotely. So the first stage of that is the workers working remotely. I think the second stage, which is still ahead of us for the most part, is the employers realizing I don't need to be on Bay Street and paying the skyrocketing rates to rent my office space. I don't even need all this office space anymore. They're going to be repositioning themselves. And I think you're going to see a lot of businesses moving to outlying areas and downsizing their bricks and mortar, stance that they have now. So there's a lot of adjustments, and all of those adjustments will continue to stimulate the real estate market locally here.
Well, Mike, here's a couple other things that are going to stimulate the real estate market. And it's no joke. I mean, people may do it with a meme and a selfie and a sort of a fun line on their social media feed, but they said in the last 20 months, you will have had done one of these three things. You will have gotten pregnant, you will have gotten a divorce, or you will have gotten a puppy. And all three of those things are real. And all of those three things change the reality for a household. They change the needs of a household. If you're having a baby, you might be moving out of your basement apartment. You might be moving out of your 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. You might be thinking that you need a nursery. You might be thinking that you need some green space around your home. Something likely will be impacted in your life if you're adding a family member. And that could also be a pet, by the way. But also if the added pressures and stresses of the pandemic have caused people to reconsider their current relationship. They spent a lot more time than they ever imagined they would together, and they got to know their significant other or themselves in a different way than they had known them before. That might be causing some marital split or just some relationship deterioration. And you've now got 2 people looking for 2 separate homes or an additional home. So these things are all pressures.
Well, they always have played into the equation.
Yeah, they always have played into the equation, but I think that the observation is that the last 20 months or 21 months has sort of aggravated or catalyzed or magnified some of these realities.
Yeah. Well, here's another thing that I've observed too, is we have seen, because of the increased demand for real estate locally, it's driven our prices up. They've, in most cases, if you're a homeowner and you've owned for 3 or 4 years, at least within that time frame, you've seen the value of your home double. That has been a shock for a pleasant shock if you're an owner, but a scary shock for buyers. But even for owners, a lot of them, we've seen for the last 10, 20 years, a lot of sideways movement, domestic real estate activity, I call it, whereas you're trading up, you're trading down, you're moving from this side of town to the other side of town, but you're doing it all within that community. That is the activity that is all but stopped in the last couple of years in Barrie. The activity we're seeing is those few sellers who are selling for whatever their reasons may be, and the buyers coming from outside. So I think there's an adjustment period where we got to get our heads around the idea that, the house that was $500,000 5 years ago is now $900,000 or $1 million. And once we're more attuned and accepting of where our values are at, I think people will be more comfortable with listing and selling and doing some of that domestic trading again. And that is going to increase the inventory levels. That's the fact that they're not doing that now is what's decreased the inventory levels and driven up our prices. So that's something that I think over the next year or two is going to shift and change. So when we see that increased inventory, it's also going to add to that, I would call it the cooling effect of the stabilization of the market.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, you raised some valid points there. My concern, though, is this. We're normalizing, right? And it's not a concern. I don't disagree with you. I think what you're asking for and what you're suggesting we're going to have to get used to is a normalization of the new reality, which is a $500,000 home 2 years ago is now $1 million. Let me put that into perspective. I just had a fantastic conversation with a very good friend of mine last night, actually, and we were talking about that exact fact. He got a call or a visit, if you will, and I don't know which one it is, so I'm inventing that part of the story, from a realtor who said, I can get you, if you're willing to list, no less than $1 million for your home today, guaranteed. Now, a little bit of backstory. This house probably would be under otherwise normal conditions, maybe in the last year or two, a $550,000 to $650,000 home all day long.
Yeah.
And it's I don't mean to insult my friend here, but there's nothing remarkable about it. It is a builder grade. It is a subdivision home, and yes, they've done some nice things to it. They've done some nice interior decorating and renovations to it, but there's nothing that stands out about it. There's no gold plated anything in the home. Again, nothing against it. It's where this market has taken us. The reality is that there is so little inventory out there, and there are people leaving the GTA or realizing they no longer have to commute or whatever it may be, who can get a real bargain, a real discount locally here in this area, and $1 million is that discounted price. So he says, well, you know what? I might as well sell. I mean, I've got no mortgage. I can put that money in my pocket, and I'm going to be in a fantastic position. I said, so what are you going to do? I can rent for a while, and I'll wait until the housing market cools, is what he was thinking. I'm going to wait until the crash happens. And I said, there isn't a crash happening. Don't hold your breath. No. It's not coming. And he said, well, why? Well, of course there's going to be a crash. There's no way this is sustainable. I said, exactly our conversation that we're having today is a conversation I had yesterday. Of course, this is sustainable for the foreseeable future when you look at all of the elements that are coming into the equation. The reality is, if he was to sell at $1 million, he'd have to buy in the same inflated market. We don't have supply. And when you look at this, one of the things that we should talk about when we come back from the break is the impact of inflation. We're looking right now in the headlines, Mike, of inflation being at 7%. If he sells and holds on to his cash, he instantly loses value on his cash at a rate of 7%.
Yeah. And I shake my head in disappointment at that realtor who had that conversation with him, was taking advantage and trying to excite people. But just what you've just said, that real estate agent knows that full well. And I think I know who that agent is. And it's a ploy to try and entice people to sell their properties. But the only scenario where that's going to work to his advantage is if A, he's never going to buy back into the local real estate market, or B, he's going to leave here and go to another market where homes are more affordable. If he thinks he's going to cash out now and buy back in within Barrie and somehow be financially ahead, well, that agent is only giving him part of the information. And again, that's wrong. It's unprofessional, if you ask me. I think
he's thinking that
give people the full picture of what they're dealing with.
And that is the challenge. And that is the huge challenge, because literally he's thinking, I'm going to sell now. I'm going to sit on my cash. I'm going to rent a place, and then I'll buy in the market when it crashes. And I'm like, well, first of all, you sell now. Sure. You instantly lose 7% if you are sitting on that cash. You're not renting a place because there's nowhere to rent in this market for a reasonable price. A $1,500 two-bedroom home a couple years ago is now $3,500. You're literally burning cash. And like you said, unless you move into an outlying area, but an outlying area, drive until you qualify is a lot longer of a drive. Mike, we got to go to break. Let's pick up where we left off, though, on the impact of inflation that we're just finally starting to realize right now. And let's pick it up right after the break with more from Mike and Arif on Hitting Home on Rogers TV. We'll be right back. I'll get it one day.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And the big question with this episode is, where are we going from here? And I think we'll talk a little bit about, in this segment, where the buyers are going and what's going to happen in regards to buyers. And in the segment following that, we'll focus on sellers. So in terms of home buying, the question is this a good year? Or I guess the more important question is, should I buy now if I'm planning to buy, or should I wait a while? And obviously, if interest rates are going to be going up, you're going to be paying more down the road for that same home. Every percentage point of increase that you see out there is equal to 10% less buying power you have as a buyer. So, you're losing ground as time goes on and interest rates go up. If you're waiting, again, for prices to drop, Arif, I know that agent we talked about previous to the break knows full well that the likelihood of prices going down is slim to none. There's a more likelihood if there's an adjustment, it's going to be you, me, and everybody else adjusting to the new prices of homes as it has always been in the past.
Yeah, Mike, I think you were trying to put a label on this, on this segment or on the show. I'm going to put a label on it as this is the segment that probably garners me a little bit of hate mail or somebody who's not loving what we're about to say, because I think you nailed it. I think that the reality is that the buyer or the prospective buyer, the one with the dream, is going to have to reanalyze and recalculate how they're going to accomplish that mission or that dream of home ownership. We, the buyer, are the ones who are going to be adjusting, not the market. And it's, again, there, you can try and twist it or what if it any way you want.
Yeah.
When you look at all of the ingredients that are feeding the equation of what sets a price, I think we come out at this result. Now, if you're paying attention to the news, you'll know that certainly municipalities are aware of what's going on. Politicians are aware of what's going on. The general public is certainly sending hate mail to their local and provincial politicians saying this is out of control, it's not sustainable. Nothing new there at all. But I think that we are starting to get, I don't know if you want to call it a fever pitch, but certainly the attitude and the emotions are starting to escalate around affordability of home ownership. And it is encouraging the local and provincial politicians to hold roundtables. I don't know what comes out of them other than we all agree something needs to be done. They're discussing how do we cut red tape, how do we flood the market with more inventory.
There's far more presence of mind there than we've seen in the past, for sure.
Yeah, so the result is we've said it on the show for a couple of years now, certainly, the answer is in supply. We are going to have to flood the market with supply. However, the reality is it's not a little bit of supply that's going to make a difference. It's going to be a whole lot of supply that is going to have to come out. Absolutely. So I think that's where we're going in this conversation, Mike.
Sure. And you touched on it. I think what we're going to see unfolding over time here, and we're starting to see it now, is buyers are just anybody involved in real estate, current owners and buyers. There's adjustment taking place. There's creativity that's having to be brought to the forefront here in how we buy, how we carry a home. And with prices as they are and likely to continue, not at the same rates, but I still expect are going to see year over year increases, anywhere from 1% to 5% in any given year for the next few years. But we're going to have to start seeing the creativity, and we've touched on some of this creativity that's taking place. One of the things we'll see happening more and more is people adding second suites within their house, creating a cash flow, revenue stream to help offset the cost of their home. So they're either going to be looking more and more, and they are looking more and more for homes with existing suites, or they're looking for that home that has a side entrance and has all the bones that they can create that second suite. We're going to see more blended families. You're going to see adult children moving in with their aging parents and vice versa, the parents moving in with the children, both as a financial incentive to do so, but also just because it's a far less expensive alternative for seniors to double up with family than it is to go into extended care. That's expensive, and the waiting list to get in are getting longer and longer. So we're seeing that blended family happen more and more, or we're seeing those seniors aging in place where they're going to be bringing in a care worker to either just visit them regularly, or move in perhaps and live in that second suite, or be a boarder within the house.
Yeah, Mike, I think we agree with that, and I think that we remain consistent with that talking point. I'm gonna shake it up a little bit more. I'm gonna be a little bit more blunt. Cue the hate mail. Here's the reality: if the average price of a home encroaches on $1 million, and we're not there just yet, but we're not that far off in comparison, right? So if just for the sake of round numbers, if the average home prices encroaches on $1 million, you're looking at a 20% down payment, which equals $200,000. You're talking a first-time home buyer lacking any other type of support subsidy or incentive is going to, and that is dependent on credit. That's dependent on a whole bunch of factors. So let's just talk in real terms here. You're looking at someone or a couple or whoever this creative group is coming together to buy this home. If it's joint and multiple, as you refer to, blended families, you're looking at saving $200,000 as a bare minimum, not including land transfer tax, not including closing costs, not including any of the other carrying costs, taxes, et cetera. $200,000 in savings. Now, here's the other thing, though.
Can I just add before you go on, just for those that might have just been scared and ran away right now, or they're writing that letter to you, that's for a 20% down payment.
That's where I'm going. Hang on.
Sure. Okay. Keep going.
All right. Right now, under the current laws, there are restrictions on what home price and what amount of mortgage allows a buyer to qualify for the CMHC reduced down payment of 5, 10, 15, call it 19.9% down payment.
What is that?
I honestly think, that's the $1 million, that is the $1 million question. And right now, I believe that the current regulations that stipulate who can qualify for CMHC default insurance and a lower down payment, I think that is going to have to change. I think that the legislators and those who are at CMHC and the equivalent insurers are going to have a look at that conversation on, $1 million today is not the same as it was yesterday, right? So I definitely think that a few things are going to have to happen. Yes, creativity is going to have to be part of the order of the day. And I mean healthy, legal, good creativity in terms of banding people together. You're going to have good credit. You're going to have a down payment. You're going to have a good job, which equals people are going to either have to drive until they qualify, as we've talked about, which could be beyond Parry Sound. It could be Timmins. It could be other provinces. Absolutely. Or it could be, as you were talking about with second suites, how can we subsidize our income? I don't know if that means a second job, if it means retraining, if it means new education, if it means opening up a side business or a side hustle. But we are going to have to look at housing affordability and the ability to purchase a home. The fundamentals aren't going to change. You have to be able to carry the mortgage at whatever the mortgage interest rate is. And Mike, as you said, if it goes up 1%, your buying power goes down 10, and you still have to qualify, right? You still have to be able to carry that freight.
But one other component of that creativity, if you want to call it that, or adjustment, is more and more parents of adult children, millennial children, are having to get involved in putting together that down payment, gifting all or some of the down payment. We're seeing that more and more. And, if you're one of those adults who's seen your home price double, you're in a position to make that donation. And I think there's, perhaps call it a moral obligations, maybe too strong. But if you've seen your home double in value and you've got $500,000 in found equity, tax-free money now, then that's part of your payback for that, is help your kids to get in, because you're benefiting and they're basically on the other side of the door. They're going to need that help. And we've got a lot of, millions and millions of millennial-aged adults here, age 25 to 35, are just entering into that home buying age. They're going to be stimulating that market. They're going to be looking to own homes, however they get in the door, in ways we've talked about here. And we've also got that aging boomer population, and a lot of their money is being transferred down, being willed to that next generation down. So that there's a shift in capital that exists within Canada. It's going from one generation to the next, or the next two generations. And I think a lot of that money will.
Yeah, Mike, I'm going to challenge that a little bit, because here's the thing. I think you talk about generational shifts, et cetera. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to redefine is what is considered wealth. 30 years ago, $1 million was not unheard of, but certainly you were definitely top 1%. Today, that we have a lot of newfound instant overnight millionaires who are millionaires on paper, and that means absolutely nothing as far as I'm concerned.
Sadly, $1 million does not excite anymore. I'm old enough to remember when the 1976 Olympics, we had our first lottery in Canada, the Olympic lottery, and the prize was $1 million. And I think all of Canada stopped and tuned into their TV last night to see if they were going to be a millionaire, because that was going to change their world. Today, $1 million is probably the equivalent of $100,000 then.
And that, Mike, is my point. Here's the reality, though. You still have to carry it. If you're talking about a mortgage, you still have to be able to qualify carrying it. So has the household income increased? Is the average household income still $80,000 or $40,000 per person? Is that still our average? You're not carrying $1 million. No. Whether your mortgage is $500,000 or your mortgage is $1 million is kind of irrelevant. On $40,000, you're not carrying either. So not only does that overnight millionaire really not mean much, as far as the senior, respectfully, sitting on suddenly newfound fortune of maybe $500,000. And again, we're using totally fictitious numbers right now, but they're not far off what is possible.
Or maybe more if they paid off their mortgage over the last.
Well, that's just it. But that same senior is now likely living longer than he or she used to, and likely has to be able to afford whatever retirement looks like, or whatever nursing care or assisted living care looks like. So that money, when you talk about some homes that are anywhere above $2,000 and up to maybe $6,000 a month for assisted living and nursing care, that money isn't going to last as long. So, again, there is no silver bullet. It's going to be a very interesting equation. Mike, we do have to go to break. On the other side, why don't we talk about some of the challenges that developers and builders are facing, and how are we pricing homes? What does this new inventory look like, considering the volatility in the marketplace, and what we were touching on earlier in the show about the impact of inflation? We do have to go to break, Mike. I'm going to try and get our show name right. It's Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We'll be right back after the break on Rogers TV Barrie.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're taking a look at a couple things here: inflation and housing increases, price increases. And here's an interesting question for you, Arif. General inflation, how is that going to impact developers, home builders, and renovators if the cost to build is increasing? What are we likely to see there, in your opinion, with regards to direct impacts on them and therefore the impacts on the home buyer at the other side of that?
Yeah, great question, Mike. And it's a tough question for people in general to ask. Certainly, if you're not intimately familiar with the development process or the development cycle, what we see certainly are the headlines. What we hear are the news stories. What we hear and talk about are, the fascinating scenarios where our neighbors just sold their house for double what they bought it for just a year or two, or maybe 3 or 4 years earlier. And those are all big shock and awe type of emotions to have to sort of digest and figure out. And so one of the things that ends up happening is that you hear conversations, or I certainly hear conversations around people saying, that subdivision that just got built, I bet the builder wishes he'd waited 2 years. He could have sold it for twice as much. And the reality is, I strongly doubt it. And here's why. Exactly what you're talking about, Mike. When we've just gone through the last 2 years where people like you and me, the average person is going and doing a small renovation, maybe building a deck, thinking about finishing the basement. We talked about at the beginning of COVID, we said, listen, hey, if you're not going to be going to Disneyland, or if you're not going to be going to Europe, why don't you take this time right now and build your staycation, build your backyard oasis? And people did. Maybe because of Hitting Home, not quite sure, because people all across Canada and the United States did exactly that. What we're dealing with, though, right now is you cannot buy a piece of drywall or a piece of plywood, certainly, for under $100. So if we're facing those costs, you have to imagine that the builder, who for years has probably been planning the subdivision, put in the plan of application, got all the permits, and then found out that the price of goods to build the building materials to build that home is up 300-400%, not sustainable. And therefore they've had to pass that on to the buyer. It's a tough deal, even if you're a developer. I know there's going to be no love lost for a lot of the developers by the general public, but it is the reality.
It is the reality. And the developers and any type of business expects to, or ideally would like to, maintain their profit margins. And if they're getting squeezed on the one side with prices, then they obviously the first or the easiest way to respond is to increase your resale price at the other end. But it's not the only way that a developer can feel pressure to deal with that. The other way, unfortunately, could be, and I'm not suggesting any are or aren't doing this, but you may see the quality of the product they're producing start to deteriorate. Fixtures, you may the fixtures that cost X number of dollars that you were going to put through your subdivision or your condominium development, maybe you're going to forfeit those for a lesser unit, and so you'll start to see a chipping away at the quality components of a home. Nobody wants to see that. It does happen. It happens in the best of times with some builders, unfortunately. But
Mike, we've seen it. Let's get into that just for a second. We've seen that over the years. I mean, just think about it. You've seen, craftsmen are no longer the norm, if you will. We're going back several decades. Now now they're called custom home builders, but even custom home builders are using manufactured products, if you want to call it the MDF style of product,
pre-built,
compared to oak or whatever it may be. Yeah. We are seeing it in trim, we're seeing it in finishes, we're seeing it in fixtures. Even if you're going with major brands, those brands are retooling, and they're no longer using copper, they're now using PEX, etc. You can call that cheapening of the product, or you can call that innovation, and it's a more reliable, more predictable product. Things do change. The reality is, though, Mike, I have been accused of being biased towards developers, and I laugh because it's kind of funny, because you just said exactly what I think. They're trying to look for options to maintain a certain profit margin, if you will. They're not in the charity business. They have to be able to turn a profit. Their bank won't lend them money if they don't show that there is an opportunity to turn a profit. They won't be able to put money down on the next project. And we're all crying that we need housing.
Well, that's the catch-22, and that is, if the public cries that developers are making more money than they're comfortable with them making, and expects that they should settle for less. If that expectation is realized, then you also need to expect that there'll be far fewer, new homes being built.
For sure.
Or you're going to see prices continue to increase. So be careful.
Absolutely. And Mike, I mean, I remember it wasn't that many years ago. I know I turned a few heads because there was a developer that came and did their presentation to council and talked about how they were going to build this type of home and that type of home. And the truth of the matter is, under planning, we're not supposed to get into discussion around finishes. We're supposed to talk about land use planning and sort of the housing mix and zoning and setbacks and things like that. But I just said, Hail Mary, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? Because nobody else is listening. And I basically called some of the developers, not in particular against a particular developer, but it was more the question is, listen, I'm not too impressed with what I'm seeing lately. I'm seeing a lot of the traditional, what we refer to as cookie cutter. We're seeing a lot of the same old. And the question is, in 2 years from now, when your home has been built, is it going to look like it's 20 years old because the finishes were subpar? Are you truly invested in the community? Are you truly invested in delivering a beautiful product? Will your finished product look like it did on the drawing that you presented in the showroom? And oftentimes, I'm going to say it, no, we haven't seen that. Why is the question? And so some people will rightly say there's an element of greed or capitalism involved. And well, true, there is. However, as you rightly pointed out, they have to make the margin to a certain degree. Where are they going to get it from?
And another scenario we see over and over again in attempting to maintain that margin is as builders are feeling squeezed because it's becoming more and more expensive for them to produce the same product over time. They're coming forward to the city, as you know full well, sitting around that table at City Council in the past and watching on Monday nights. The proposals that come forward become more and more ambitious. Instead of 10 or 12 stories along the lakeshore, now they want 25 stories. Instead of, 10 units of townhomes on a tract of land in an existing built area of the city. They're coming in with proposals for 20 back-to-back townhouses because the economies of scale come into play. And that's one way to combat or at least stay on par with the rising costs.
You're absolutely right.
When the city then turns down that proposal or counters with something that's smaller, you've taken away those profit margins. So
we the people, Mike.
Sorry, the builder may just put that property back on the sale. I can't do this for this money. Yep. So it doesn't get built, or what gets built is a lesser product than what
you see it time and again, Mike. You see it time and again. And we, the people, are we speaking out of both sides of our mouth, or are we not? Or is it just different factions of people expressing their opinions or their discontent? The reality is we are all crying for more supply, whether we know it or not. We're crying about the unattainable cost of housing for many, certainly the first timers, but not even the first timers. That's not limited to the first timers. There are people who are either on a fixed income or on an income that simply hasn't kept pace with said inflation. And so you're absolutely right, Mike. It's not that they're greedy because they want an extra 3 or 4 stories on that condo. It's because they can spread the cost out, of certain, if you're going below grade to build a parking garage or whatever some of the common elements are that are expensive and materials are expensive, they're able to spread the cost out across more people. Yes, they're making more money. Like they may not be getting their profit until they've built X number of units. They may not be breaking even until they're getting X number of units, but they may also be able to temper the price point by spreading it across more units. It is basic math. It's not just a matter of opinion. Here's a question, though, I'd like to ask, Mike, and that is, we often say, and I think we're going to stand by it here as well, that it is unlikely that we're going to see the cost of housing decrease. We're not going to see the price of homes go down. However, the question is this. We are in a pandemic. We are having supply chain issues. We are having issues that have forced the price up. Supply and demand, supply chain, whatever it may be. That $30 piece of plywood is $100. Because of the pandemic and pandemic related challenges. We're not going to be in a pandemic forever. We are going to figure our way out of it. Either it's going to mutate out of the human system, or we're going to learn to deal with it. My question is, when we get back to some form of normal pricing structure in the supply chain, will that have an impact on pricing to see it come down?
Well, let's delve into that in the final segment of the show here in a little more detail.
That's a question that I'm literally asking, though, and I am interested about it, Mike. And we may not solve it, and there are questions of will we meet demand and will that have an offset? But it is a factor, and I think it's a fair question if the general public is wondering that. I'm wondering it because I've never lived through a pandemic like this before, and my knowledge on that type of economics isn't that strong. So I'd like to see what rolls out, but. Anyway, so this is what we're talking about, though, Mike. We're talking about the impact on builders.
Yeah, but there never has been a static or status quo. There's the term.
Or crow. Yeah.
Real estate market where what happened last year happens this year and will happen next year. It's always been adjustment and catch up and responding to different influences. And again, we'll touch on that final segment on just the correlation between inflation and housing prices and what those impacts are and what that we're seeing at the moment and will continue to see or may yet see. It is an up and down thing. And that's part of, like the stock market, yours and my job and the job of the buyer and the seller to try and anticipate, take the best of information we have, relate it to the reactions in the past to try and predict what's going to happen in the future to, at the very least, keep your stance, not lose ground, and in the best case scenario, maybe make a little money along the way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is always opportunity. We've talked about it, though. I mean, the reality is, from a builder's perspective, they do have certain costs as well. There are labor shortages.
Yep.
We're seeing that, but many of them have been looking to put a shovel in the ground for a number of years.
Yep.
They're finally seeing some relief from some implied form of cooperation between the province and the municipalities around removing red tape and making it easier or more streamlined to get those shovels in the ground. You know what? The other reality is, though, we're seeing discussion around building highways or alternatives to building highways. We're seeing discussion around the fact that people are moving outside the city, and how is that going to change the mix of residential to commercial or industrial land uses. Yep. A few years ago, they were talking locally here about actually sort of selling off some of the land or rezoning some of the land that was intended for industrial use because there was no demand for it. Is that going to change? We do have to go to break. Mike, what do you want to talk about when we come back?
Well, let's put a bow on this one and just talk about some of those correlations between inflation and the price of housing and how it's impacting everybody. Maybe talk a little bit about this year, 2022. If you are planning to buy or sell, is sooner better than later? Let's talk about that.
Strategy around that. Absolutely. We'll be right back with more Hitting Home with Mike and Arif right after this break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We're looking at inflation, rising housing prices, how it all impacts on everybody, what our expectations should be. And I think what I would say to anybody out there who is waiting and anticipating that housing prices are going to drop again, I think it's more likely that we're going to see and we're going to have to adjust to these increased prices that are out there right now. That's more of a likelihood than us ever seeing the prices coming back to what our expectations, our wishes are. And that's going to take some time for some people. I think wages are going to need to increase across the board, which is a slow process, but it does happen historically. We will see wages trying to catch up with what the new price points are for houses and everything else out there. And, looking at inflation here and its tie with mortgage rates here, any thoughts on that, Arif, on, looking at this year ahead and that looming rise in interest rates?
Yeah, Mike, I've got a lot of thoughts on this, no surprise. And as I mentioned early in the show, I probably have a couple of opinions here as well, and not all of them are going to be well received. They're not necessarily going to be popular, but I stand by them in the fact that I think
you're not here to be popular, Arif.
No, I never was. I think they're going to be accurate, though, and it's really is this. I'm actually going to challenge a couple of thoughts that you made just a moment ago around the fact that we're going to have to get used to it and we're going to have to wait for wages to catch up. I don't think wages are going to catch up. That's my point. And this is where it gets unpopular for me. I'm okay with this. The reality is, I think it's absolutely unrealistic for a couple things to happen. One, I think it's unrealistic for prices to come down significantly enough to make a difference. And well, what are the pressures that are going to make those prices come down? The pressures that we've been talking about are increasing supply. The reality, in my opinion, is that it's going to be a long while before the amount of supply that gets built and that legislators allow to get built and that the people who challenge urban sprawl or some form of growth are going to allow to get built, whichever way you want to look at it, right? There's always pressures in the equation, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be a long time before that amount of supply offsets the demand enough to see prices go down. So even if price of materials comes down, we've still got pressures of people moving out of GTA. We've still got immigration. We've still got people living longer. We've still got all the things that we talked about earlier in the show. And I think it's going to be that we need a significant amount of supply before that needle gets moved. When it comes to, though, affordability and what the people are going to have to do, as you said, to get used to it, to adjust to it, and to see the wages increase, I also don't buy that. I don't buy that if we move the needle enough on minimum wage, people are going to be able to buy $1 million homes. Minimum wage is at 15. 15 is around $30,000 a year. Two people in a home at $30,000 a year is about $60,000 a year. You're not buying $1 million home. It's not happening. You're going to have 4 or 5 people in the household at $30,000 a year before you can get them in. So we're going to have to do that. But here's the thing. Wages, in my opinion, are not going to catch up. So what's the alternative?
Well,
people are going to have to embrace the idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and changing their ability to bring in revenue. And my opinion is we need to, if we're talking to our kids who are coming out of or about to go into university, forget about coming out of university. Before you go to university, decide what you want from your life. What does it look like? Peace, love, and happiness. Wonderful. Yeah. Or if it's a standard of living, you're going to have to do the math on it. How much do I need to make in order to earn enough money to buy the lifestyle that I want to buy? Because that's exactly what you're doing, is you're buying lifestyle. So my opinion is we have to get real about what do I have to do to command the revenue, not just say, well, I want an easy life, but I want to make $1 million. We'll join the club. We all do. But if we're going to get real about this, what type of jobs are going to address a gap that the public or the market is going to pay you what you want to get paid so that you can buy the life you want to buy? And that life is going to be over $100,000 a year for the average person. It's going to have to be.
Well, there's a lot of people working in the trades earning over $100,000 a year. Lots of plumbers, lots of electricians, lots of other various trades earning comfortable livings, and they're in far greater demand than they can serve. So that's something for everybody considering.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mike. And that's what I'm saying is that we have to get comfortable with that. We have to say, my son, my daughter, whoever it is, or me, I changed my career more than once. Yeah. Right. We have to get comfortable with saying, where's the demand? I'm going to go do it, and it's going to pay me what I need because I'm going to be able to command it. And I think 100,000 is the new 40,000.
Those liberal arts and philosophy courses aren't necessarily going to translate to 6-figure incomes down the road, but
they're not useless. But I don't think
that's not me, dissing education. I think everybody needs an education, but I think everybody needs realistic expectations too when they focus on careers. I would say one other thing, or let me pose this as a question to you. Do you see, in response to all of this, do you see a return to the 30-year mortgage, something that we once saw as an option here in Ontario, taking 30 years versus 20 or 25 years to pay down the mortgage on a home, given the price points of homes now, trying to pay them down in that same 25-year period means larger monthly payments, obviously. Do you think there's an expectation we'll see?
Yeah, great question. Newsflash: the 30-year mortgage still exists. The difference is, are you going to get
about it much?
No. Well, are you going to get a 30-year mortgage on a CMHC backed insurance product is the question. And so I think the question is, are we going to see a return to the 40-year mortgage? And there are still some alternative lenders. Alternative does not mean back alley, does not mean bad, just non-conventional, non-CMHC or Genworth, they're not really that anymore, default insured mortgages offering that. And I think that there will be a lot of resistance to that because is it fiscally prudent? Is it financially responsible to stretch your mortgage out over 40 and 50 years because of how much more you're paying over the lifetime of the mortgage? At some point, there's going to be a conversation between regulators, legislators, if you will, and industry experts around what is responsible. And times are tough, times are tight. What are we going to do in terms of the reality of people's cash flows being squeezed? I think
reality is month to month, though. So that's what people.
That's right. That's right. So I do think the conversation is always being had, but I think that it's almost like putting your finger on the button as a president. It's a last resort. It's not something you want to do, and they're looking for every other way that they can stimulate the economy. But I do think there's going to have to be a huge push in the education system in terms of expectations around how do we prepare our citizens to be, how do we educate our citizens and prepare to be better prepared, and And I know that there are going to be a lot of people throwing something at the TV when they hear me say that, but it's not because it's my opinion. It's not because what I want to see. Well, it is my opinion, but it's not what I want to see. It is a reality. Handouts aren't going to happen. You cannot subsidize your way out of this scenario that we're in. We're going to have to truly find multiple inputs to change the tide, to change the direction that reality is right now.
I'm keeping it to sort of more of a rapid fire here. I'll throw another question at you, Arif, and it's quite apparent that the inflation that we're seeing and that we're going to continue to see, and inflation typically comes, it's not all at once, or I shouldn't say inflation, I'm talking interest rate. Those interest rates will increase in increments. That won't be all at once. We've seen a little bit of an increase so far early in 2022, but I think the better part of that increase that's being expected will take place later this year. It's being driven, we are told, by inflation. The inflation is being driven by events that have happened as a result of the pandemic. So if we get through the pandemic and that's gone, what are your thoughts on a reversal of those rate increases? Is that a healthy expectation or realistic expectation?
Yeah. So no. Short answer, no. You're right, though, Mike. Interest rates are being driven by inflation. And, there are people who have their own agenda who aren't going to love what I'm going to say. Surprise, surprise again. We are where we are because of, on a global scale, I'm not going to blame Canadians or Ontarians or whatever. We're seeing it south of the border. We're seeing it all across Europe. Inflation is creeping up. And for some, it's creeping up higher and faster than others. Canada has probably the highest inflation rate. US is certainly up in the running there. We're at, 7%. I can't remember. I apologize if I'm inaccurate on this, everybody. I don't know if the US is around 9%, but it's huge. Inflation rates are really huge. And yes, that's pushing in on interest rates. Why? Because we're printing money and we're subsidizing, we're doing all things. So when the statement gets made by everybody, the economy has never been better, it's baloney. The economy has never been better on a bed of eggshells, right? Because that bed of eggshells is the subsidy or is all of the things that we're doing for understandable reasons to say we need people to be able to put food on their table. You alluded to it earlier about big screen TVs flying out the door at Best Buy and Costco. So the reality is, yes, we are subsidizing, and yes, that's causing inflation, and yes, that's going to cause interest rates. So I don't know how strong the economy really is, because I believe that we will not be able to see a massive or a sudden shift in interest rates higher, because I don't believe the foundation can hold it. I believe the eggshells will crush, will crumble, and the economy will suffer, and we will see a higher than average number of defaults, if you will. So that's my long answer to a simple question. But Mike, I'm going to give you an opportunity to wrap this up. You got 30 seconds. Give it a whirl.
Lots of great information in this episode, Arif, and my takeaway is houses are going to continue to be built, and maybe at a greater pace. The demand for houses is going to continue in there, but our expectations may need to be tempered a little bit. What are your thoughts as a mortgage broker, Arif?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I do think rates are going to creep. I think they have to creep a little bit. I think that that will be a signal to people that says, hey, start tightening your belt. Do better calculations, be better prepared, because we have to forewarn. And remember, rates creeping aren't higher rates. They're not huge. They're still relatively low. But I think that the public, the buyer, is going to have to embrace the concept that things aren't the way they used to be, and we need to prepare for what tomorrow looks like.
Excellent.
We got to go, but thanks for joining us on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We'll see you again.